And I think this has really been getting a lot of notoriety. His project that I'm sure he's going to tell us about, he's been working for the past 10.5 years on the Collage Journal. And it's an ongoing project. I know when I was looking at the New York Times article, I believe it was, talking about how every single day, without fail, he would wake up and make these collages from the pages of the New York Times. So let's hear all about it. Thanks.
Okay, how do I change this? Good morning, and thank you for having me, and thank you for coming. Let's see if I can get out of this one. All right, so I'm 10.5 years ago, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my wife Elizabeth, and she turned to me and she suggested, why don't we do a daily art practice? And I took some pause there, I thought about it, and I thought, I had my 20 years under my belt making collages, so it's a very natural visual language for me. And holding the newspaper, I was saying, maybe because of my disenchantment with just the world politics, the climate changes, just the general disarray and chaos and I think it was historic times, and we're living in historic times, that I'd have a dialogue with the newspaper, and I'd kind of work from it, cut it, and redesign it to my intentions. And in the first couple of years, what I would do is I would pretty much have a social commentary running with it. This is a typical table. Every morning I'd get up, I haven't missed a day in 10.5 years, and the kitchen table would look like that. All I'd have is my coffee, and I'd shred the paper for 2 hours. I did that this morning as well. My tools are basically just the x-acto, the glue stick, and the cutting mat that I wear out till I have to keep replacing it. I've probably gone through hundreds of cutting mats, hundreds of x-acto blades. And the books themselves, they're in 12-page Strathmore books. And so there's at least 300 volumes of the Collage Journal that are there. Let's see. Here's an example of the book, and then a final piece that was done. If I'm traveling, what I'll do is I'll go get a local newspaper, and I'll have a traveling bag that I bring. My studio is basically this, and in it I have everything I need. So I'll pull that out. What I found, the act of doing this, the first couple of years, it maybe takes, people say 3 weeks and you have a habit. I think it takes about 3 months to get it in your blood to do something every day. And it builds on itself. There's an evolution, I think, of the strength of, what you see, how you see, and how you create it. This is an example of how I store them. The books are obviously piled there. The black linen cases are, after I do 30, 40 of them, they get put into the cases and then dated. And so I have quite a few cases as well, running out of room to store these. But, all right, so what I wanted to do was get this video thing happening there. Maybe I could get an assistance on this. I don't know. What I have is a little time lapse, kind of showing the process of the. It's on the desktop. There we go. And so I guess I don't have a predetermined end result when I sit down with the work or with the paper. I kind of work through it, and it's kind of like cooking without a recipe. I generate ideas based on what I start building upon and the layers, and then as I go through the process, it suggests to me, I have a running dialogue, I call it visual dialogue, with the work that I do. And it comes out in a way that I would have never thought I would end up with, and then I realize why, after I've done it, the reasoning behind how I've gotten there. I have a visual logic that pervades through the process, I think. Many times I'll create the work just loosely without attaching it to the paper, and then I'll completely disassemble what I've created and reassemble it in a new kind of piece. I find there's a freedom not knowing where you're going with things. And I always quote like a Kurt Vonnegut quote of saying, you know, always know where you're going so you never get there. And I believe there's a strength in that intuition of life as well. So yeah, basically this is just over 2 hours. You know, I start going through it. I'll go through the paper. I'll rifle through it a couple, 6 or 7 times every section. I'll cut new things out, and then it just suggests to me the direction that I really feel strongly in going. I studied color theory with actually a disciple of Joseph Albers, who really influenced me in terms of color. And I also have a very kind of architectural kind of background of structure in the forms. So they're built with some underlying structure many times. Like I could go back to the, there's the final piece there. Beautiful. Okay, so here is an example of the early years. I consider like the first 3 years I was much more suggestive and literal commentary. There was, this was in 2005. This is one of the first pieces actually. And what I found was that there were more didactic narratives that I wanted to pursue with the work at that point, because I felt kind of a rage with the politics and what was happening in the world. There's also a visual element that I always like to integrate regardless to the piece. A lot of them, I consider there's certain like surreal, magic realism. As it goes on, it lends itself to, again, it mixes with social commentary and such. I mean, here's ways of kind of layering the works so that it suggests, that it kind of transforms where the original medium is. I believe they're successful when you're really not sure, that you can never identify this came from the New York Times. What I do with the work, since people might think, well, it's not archival and it'll fade with time, is I use archival glues, I use an archival paper that it's on. But after I finish each book, I spray each one with a deacidification spray, which neutralizes the pH. And then I also varnish a UV coating over each. So they are, I have pieces from 15 years ago that are just as good as they were the day I made them, basically. No, I don't think they'll last forever. So here, this is kind of showing as the progression of years go by. There's new elements that develop with the kind of the narrative as well as the visual narrative. I like the idea of creating more abstraction, almost painting with paper. So there's some, these are still in a more narrative identifiable way. As time goes by, I start to introduce more visual kinds of magic realism, that they're impossible spaces, and the layers are kind of built in different kinds of relationships. There's something that, there's something about silence here, that, here we have troops, walking by, and then there's this kind of, strength of the foreground of the figure there. I like to have everyone who looks at it to bring their own story to it. I think the power in many of the works is the ambiguity that it relays to people, and that everyone can look at it and bring a different story. I guess it was about 10 years ago, the New Jersey Poets Society took a number of them, and different poets worked with each image and wrote a poem with regard to their vision of what they saw when looking at these. And these are things that are subconsciously, intuitively coming out a lot. As I said, it's not a form of intentional involvement in what I'm doing here. It's something that I realize after I've done it, why I've done it. And I find that an exciting kind of way to work, where you discover the piece after you've done it, because I'm kind of in a meditation. Every morning, I'm still kind of dreaming. It's like 6, 7 in the morning, whatever it is. It's early, and I'm still, the day is fresh, my mind is fresh. If I did this at 5 in the afternoon, I'd have the baggage of the day there, and I find that there's an importance, it sets my day up. It really creates this focused discipline. Even if I'm at the kitchen table and my kids were younger then they're screaming and my wife's like, making breakfast or whatever, tending to getting them to the bus or whatever, I would still be tranced in what I'm doing. So it would create this wonderful meditation, I guess, as it became more evident as time went on. And as you see, I find that I really want to bring something new to it every time I do it. I try to really create a fresh, and there's more obvious metaphors here, but I try to create a fresh view of how I'm going to pursue it. So sometimes I'll have a visual concept that I'm going to work with based on a couple elements I've pulled out, and then from that I build on it, and then it transforms through the process of creating it. And it's the kind of thing that evolves through time. As 10.5 years have gone by, I feel that the work has matured in a more painterly manner, and it's become, in some ways, more minimal with respect, but it's also become more, evolved. There's something that I enjoy not having identifiable characters in the actual pieces, although they still will reappear. As you can see. I really like using fish. I don't know how many of the ones I've put in here. What I've done here is I've taken a small, 5 from each year of 10 years. And it's kind of somewhat representative of each year. They were pulled from, I had a show at the Hunterdon Museum over the last, from May to September. And it consisted of a 10-year retrospective that had 120 pieces in it. And those 120 pieces, they were chosen 12 from each year of 10 years. And I kind of, again, intuitively picked the 12 from each year that seemed to represent the evolution as time went by, both in my mind, how I would deal with the paper, what I brought to it, and what the paper brought to me, and how it evolved. So these, should represent the 5 from each of the 10 years. What I was going to say about the fish is I've used fish a lot in the pieces. I really have a fondness of fish because it represents, it's kind of symbolic as life, but it also has just a visual strength that I don't find with any other animal or any other amphibian. So here we have, this is more of kind of where a lot of them were going, where they were more painterly. There's more to do with the form and relationships of the space and the form. And again, this is untouched, just cut from the paper. There's the color. When I started this in 2005, I think color was added a couple of years before that. I don't think it was, it was probably 2 or 3 years that color was in the papers. So it slowly, through time, color became more prevalent, which gave me, obviously, a better palette to work with. Yeah, and then there's, these kinds of elements. I like playing with figurative elements that are not encompassed by the body of the figure anymore, that they kind of become something other than themselves. And there's certain repetitive, sensibilities that you'll see. And then there are more didactic ones that will crop up like this. And, some of that is unavoidable. You have to scream every once in a while. And this is, again, a very simple one, but I think I love the elegance of the simplicity of color and form. And that's, recently, the ones that actually I have the newest book with me are tending to be more about form and less about more narrative, or what I call magic realism. And I think there was a series I did where when I was having a show a couple years ago, I was doing a couple a day because I needed to have originals for the show, because I've not broken up the original set of 3,900 of them. I have that continuity, but when I have an original show, or show that wants originals, I wound up doing like 2 a day for, 12 weekends or so, 3 a day. So I have enough originals for that, and this was one of the additional originals that I used. Again, the fish. And I love the way what I do with these actually every day for the last 8 years, I believe it's been 8 years, is I'll post them after I do them first thing in the morning. I'm usually done. I don't schedule jobs till 10 a.m. because I have to have that window from 7 to 10 or whatever to do this, if I'm lucky. I mean, today I got up even earlier to do it. But once I'm done with them, I'll post them on a blog that I have for the last 8 years, as well as on Facebook, to have kind of this immediacy of the times, like a newspaper. The art is present on that day of the day it's created, and it's relevant, I think. And I think this was the 4th of July one. Yeah, and I like that, there's second glimpses that you kind of look at things. It's a double take sometimes, because the form kind of seduces you that it feels whole, composition, but when you start looking at the elements in the composition, you decipher that, and it becomes a stronger piece to me that, you can do that, and it gives you some room to move around in. And again, exploring new ways to work with the paper is an ever-present part of the process for me. So I kind of will say, okay, today I'm going to be monochromatic, and I'll challenge myself with a new exercise of the day. And I find that one of the big things that I use as my philosophy of art is that within the limitations you have more freedom. And I think by just having the palette of the newspaper, it gives me a freedom of expression that I can really build upon, and it really becomes so natural to me to use the newspaper as the medium after a number of years. The only time that I don't use an x-acto is if I'm like traveling. I've done them on planes where I have to rip them, so I can't bring my x-acto on the plane. And so I'll be in New Orleans, and I'll be coming back, and I'll rip, the picayune to shreds on the plane. The guy next to me is looking at me like I'm kind of crazy, but it's a way to get it done that day. Again, I like using kind of spatial relationships with color and form, creating, just more painterly pieces that, using paper as paint. And this, again, is getting later on, where the social commentary is pretty much gone in most cases, and there's more of this kind of surreal work that might be more literal, but more so they're more abstracted. And where are we, 9? Okay. So the first year I did this, I had no idea if I was going to do it for a month, or 5 months, or 2 days. And as you go on, the strength, and I can't encourage this enough in artists or people of any medium, that the use of doing something, the power of that on a regular basis, it builds on it. It builds your character. It builds a strength of what you're doing that is just something that you'll know it when you start doing it for a period of time, and it becomes where you command the medium. Then you can relax more with the way your sensibility will be introduced to it, because you trust your intuition a lot more. And there's my fish again. And again, the fish, there's just something about their form, and maybe it's my childhood. I always had a fish tank when I was growing up. And so this one too is, I like creating these kind of environments that are painterly, that kind of are a mixture between, there's a space in there, you can kind of walk through it, but there's also the abstraction of what's there. And I really, I think as an artist, to me, the visual content of something is paramount. I think that the message becomes kind of secondary in certain respects, or it works so well with it, it's hand in hand. And here again, it's it's one of those spaces that you're in that you don't quite know what that space is, but it feels like it has dimension, And there's, you know, I also consider these kind of as theaters. They're almost theatrical in their, you know, a lot of the ones when I use form, like figures in them, there's a theater to the feeling. There's almost this psychological, you know, input that I'm putting in there within this theatrical space. And again, it's something you have to look at, and you know, your eyes kind of start pulling out more elements in there the longer that you look at them. And part of it is working small. I'm working on a 9 by 12 page, so I'm very focused on this very small thing I'm working on. And by creating, you know, just within that scale, I have a greater kind of respect for every little element is important in it. So, you know, everything in there is very intentional. It's not, you know, it's not arbitrary, but it's visually intentional. You know, there's kind of, again, a visual analytic knowledge that I have when I do it. And this, actually, this is the cover of my catalog that was from the Huntington Museum show, which actually is available if people would like a copy. It's a 28-page catalog that shows all 120 pieces of the show, as well as a really wonderful introduction by Eric Levin.